Welcome all. We will get a few more people joining in the course of the next 50 minutes, but welcome all. My name is Vincent Fain, ex-diplomat. I used to be the Consul General of the UK in Jerusalem, and I'm very grateful to Joe Willits of Caabu for making this event happen with the Britain Palestine Project, our charity. I'll introduce Danny in 1 second. The purpose of the meeting is to hear from him on events in Israel, Palestine, including Jerusalem, but specifically on the E1 settlement project, which threatens the two-state outcome that is the policy of governments represented by MPs here. And E1 will come about in the summer unless action is taken by governments. A quick word about Danny before we turn over to him. I've known Danny since I was in Jerusalem and trust him greatly as a reliable, informed, objective advocate to stop and wind back settlements. But he works on the basis of fact. Is the co-founder of Terrestrial Jerusalem, a very again, objective website which chronicles the development of settlements. And he's also deeply interested in the holy sites in Jerusalem and the status quo there. Danny, if I may turn to you and ask you to speak for 20, 30 minutes on such issues, and then we'll open the discussion for questions and finish on the hour. Over to you, Danny.
Thank you, Sir Vincent. I'm grateful for you and to Caabu for organizing this. It's important that we be able to get the word out. And at the moment, travel is not exactly something that's easy for us. World attention is riveted on Iran, Ukraine. There's very little bandwidth left for Jerusalem, the occupation, the West Bank, but the enormity of the events in Iran and the Ukraine don't make the situation in Jerusalem or the West Bank less dire in their circumstances. What we try to do is to distill those issues that you must know, regardless of the circumstances, to do so precisely, and when possible, how can they be acted upon, given the fact that there's not a lot of available political energy for engagement. Looking at the current situation in the West Bank and Israel, there's a problem keeping the number of things that are required to be addressed, keeping that list short. The settler violence is not only a moral aberration, it's also an attempt at ethnic cleansing. And that is not myself as a marginal kibbutzer, former Prime Minister Olmert and heads of the military are saying. Israel is engaged in ethnic cleansing. Settlement expansion in the West Bank is, it's hemorrhaging, it's out of control. But I will stick to the two issues that are in the field of my expertise, which is Jerusalem writ large. Let's start with E1. I had hoped to be able to post a map, but I think all of you are familiar enough. First of all, let's get our geographical bearings. I've done this with you, many of you, in person from the top of Mount Scopus, Mount of Olives. Imagine Jerusalem is the center of the face of a clock. So it's 12 o'clock to Ramallah, 6 o'clock to Bethlehem, 3 o'clock to Jordan. And standing over this area from Mount Scopus, you would be able to see on a clear day Jordan. So between East Jerusalem and the Jordan River, it's about 32 kilometers, not a long distance. And Jerusalem itself is 832 meters above sea level, and the Jordan River is 430 meters below sea level, which means that this is a massive drop, which is part of the issues involved in E1. Nestled between East Jerusalem, occupied East Jerusalem, and the area that I'm talking about, the occupied West Bank, is the settlement of Ma'ale Adumim. Ma'ale Adumim is the third largest settlement in the West Bank, with approximately 40,000 souls. And for years, Israeli governments have been entertaining the ideas, how do we link Ma'ale Adumim to Israel proper so that in any permanent status agreement, Ma'ale Adumim will be part of Israel? The answer that is given, and it's not the only answer, is E1. E1 is the entire built-up area between East Jerusalem and Ma'ale Adumim. It's 12.5 square kilometers. So if you imagine, again, Jerusalem being the center of the face of the clock, it is the built-up area between the center of the clock and 3 o'clock at Ma'ale Adumim. It's also worth noting that the occupied West Bank, and everything I'm telling you is about the occupied West Bank, is where the occupied territories are at its narrowest waist. If you move to the north, the West Bank is much larger. If you move to the south, the West Bank is much larger. This is the narrow waist of the West Bank. I first saw E1 in 1996, and nobody had heard the name. And I saw it and immediately said, this is not just another settlement. This is a doomsday settlement. Why? Because E1, when built, would drive a wedge through the West Bank so that Israel would be extended from the territorial waters in the Mediterranean through the beach in Tel Aviv, West, Israel proper, West Jerusalem. And then this wedge would go through the heart of the West Bank and end up looking over on the bluffs looking over the Jordan River. It would fragment and fracture any possible Palestinian state. Now, settlements are a grave threat to two-state solution, and we have to treat all of them very seriously. But E1 is unique in that it alone can prevent the creation of a reasonable border, an acceptable border between Israel and any reasonable interpretation of a Palestinian state. It would fragment and fracture any future Palestinian state and basically make it unsustainable geographically and economically. In addition, E1 would seal East Jerusalem from its environs, from its hinterland in the West Bank. And in the absence of a geographical connection between the West Bank and East Jerusalem, the possibility of a Palestinian national capital in occupied East Jerusalem becomes impossible or inordinately more difficult. And we consider that to be one of the sine qua non. There's not going to be an agreement between Israelis and Palestinians, either with a fragmented Bantustan states with fractured cantons, or without a national capital in East Jerusalem. Having looked at this in 1996, I took it to Washington. And as after the first meeting in the State Department, I remember spreading the maps out on the floor of Dennis Ross's office. And he said, "You're not leaving town without taking this to the White House." I will share with you via emails the maps that we have, but anybody who looks at the map, it doesn't require a great deal of knowledge to understand the impact of this. And as a result of that, President Clinton then told Netanyahu, the original, not the sequel, saying, don't dare build E1. Don't dare. You want E1? That's fine. That's exactly what negotiations are for. You are not to build E1. And that policy has been universal or virtually universal since then. Every American president since Clinton, whether it was Bush, Bush too, whether it was President Obama, and even Trump read Netanyahu the Riot Act. You are not to build E1. On occasion, he would advance things through the planning process. Even Trump, in his first term, did not allow for the construction of E1. That has also been the case among the capitals in Europe. And it was a matter that was discussed. E1 did not suffer from neglect. Actually, Ariel Sharon started to build E1 in 2004, I believe, yes. And it was Jack Straw, who had been briefed on the subject, spent a weekend in Alabama with Condoleezza Rice, convinced her, who convinced the president, and President Bush said, stop, you're not going to do this. I will fast forward. In recent months, or basically since the new Netanyahu government at the beginning of 2023, we've seen a Netanyahu unlike the prime minister we have come to know and love. In the past, with all of his bluster, he was engageable. He was in some way attentive to international engagement. I'm not overstating this. Obviously, we have, become immune to engagement with our allies. But this is Netanyahu unleashed, unengageable. All sorts of things that he would not have dared do in the past. He was genuinely risk averse. He prided himself of not embroiling Israel into any wars. Well, since October 7th, that's the only thing he has been doing. And consequently, last August, E1 received final statutory approval. And in early January, tenders were published for the construction of E1, the first stage of it, which will be 3,410 units. The tenders, when E1 was approved, people pretty much gave up. When I say people, I'm talking about the heads of state and foreign ministers. It's over. And the despair is quite understandable, but it's not correct. E1 becomes unstoppable when those tenders are awarded. Why am I saying that? If today Netanyahu were to have a change of heart, there is absolutely no legal constitutional barrier. He can change his mind and pull it or defer it indefinitely. He's under no legal obligation to build E1. Once, however, the tenders will lead to the contracts for the construction of E1, that's the point of no return. It's the point of no return because third-party rights are involved, building contractors, planners, attorneys, financial institutions, banks, etc. The tenders, final version of them will be published on May 3rd. The end of the tender period is July 3rd, which means we have between now and July 3rd to prevent the implementation of E1, because once the tenders are awarded and the contract signed, that should be sometime in August, it becomes virtually impossible to stop it. Now, most people have despaired of the possibility of stopping this. For years, I've been participating with friends in Europe about what to do. What consequences will be imposed on Israel if we proceed with E1? Israel became to be understood. E1 became to be understood as the ultimate red line, which could not be crossed with impunity. Well, the red line was crossed, and there was impunity. Now, I understand that these are not simple times, but there was nothing more than the milquetoast condemnation. Not giving up, we have come up with an idea which is being treated seriously in the capitals of Europe. First of all, it is not too late to engage Netanyahu and to read him the riot act, as they say. Although, to be honest, I don't think that that will suffice in preventing the tender process to moving towards conclusion. Netanyahu is already in election mode. He is speaking to his base. Even if there were to be robust engagement from the international community, and we saw as a result, in the foreign ministers meeting the other day, robust engagement is not something that is easily done, if at all. What we're suggesting is the following, that states in Europe, particularly in Europe, not the EU as a whole, states in Europe make the following declaration, that any individual or body corporate who participates in the planning or implementation or construction of E1, whether he or she or it be town planners, attorneys, contractors, construction companies, and most importantly, financial institutions, including bank. If you participate in that, we're not punishing you. We are warning you ahead of time. You will jeopardize your ability to do business in Europe or with us. I think that would have a very chilling effect on the participation. I'm not sure, it's not been tried before, but for example, banking institutions are critical for the implementation of E1. They have legal responsibilities of risk assessment, and risking their ability to do business with the UK or France and Germany, and the UK, France, and Germany are looking at this proposal very seriously. That I think would have a daunting effect. And you don't have to do anything except state it. I would highly recommend meaning what you say when you state it. But it's not a heavy lift, and it does, if it were done by the E3 together, it would be great. But that is, I think, the last best hope of stopping E1, and what I can tell you is that at the highest echelons, this proposal is under consideration, including the UK. We're asking people to go where they haven't gone before. On the other hand, the circumstances demand it. I will give 3 minutes on the status quo, maybe 6, okay? Because it's important. Look, very, very briefly, the status quo, quoting Netanyahu, is very simple. Muslims pray at the Al-Aqsa, the Temple Mount, non-Muslims visit. Netanyahu was extremely responsible in maintaining the status quo until about 2017, and since then, there has been erosion. Today, it is being violated on a daily basis. It's not only a question of Jewish prayer, which makes it sound like a matter of piety. It has become an arena for interreligious and international skirmishing, displays of triumphalism, Israeli flags, etc. This is the kind of thing that triggers compulsive violence. Not all the time, but eventually over time it does. all we need to do is to look at the events of 2000, September 2000, which triggered the Second Intifada. This has become more problematic because we now have a minister in the government, Ben-Gvir, the head of national security, who goes there intentionally and demonstrably prays and says, we're here because this is ours. We're not your guests. We're the landlords. We're the proprietors. Enormously incendiary. In the past, Netanyahu would rein him in. I have a clip of Netanyahu from 2021 where he says, I could have brought Ben-Gvir into the government, but he insists on Jewish prayer. But I know what that would mean. Netanyahu says it would mean war with the Muslim world. Netanyahu, 2 months ago, stated in a cabinet meeting, everything that Ben-Gvir is doing is coordinated with me. Now, throughout, it has been the Shin Bet, the Shabak, who have been the mainstay of maintaining stability. As most secret services, they have a checkered record on all sorts of matters. They have been the responsible adult, full stop, and engaged very seriously and continue to engage with the Jordanian Secret Service, which is really what allows in many ways to prevent the Al-Aqsa, the Temple Mount, from turning into a small nuclear device. There is, however, a new head of the Shabak who himself has said he's a Messianic Jew and there's nothing wrong with Messianism, who tried to change the screensaver of the Shin Bet from the organization's logo into a picture of the Dome of the Rock. He's taking senior commanders on tours in the spirit of the Book of Samuel Bet in the Old Testament, and trying to depose the legal advisor and replace her with somebody who represented the Temple Mount movement. I am convinced that the professional echelons of the Shabak are as responsible as they were in the past. On the other hand, we now have an organization that we can no longer rely on the mainstay of Shabak being the mainstay of stability. And a misstep here under the volatile circumstances today would be extremely problematic. Now, I'm mentioning this to you because it is becoming more serious on a daily basis, but also because it's time sensitive. Jerusalem Day is when Israel celebrates the reunification of Israel. It's a national holiday, largely celebrated from the national religious. It's also a time when youth go marauding through the Muslim quarter of the old city screaming death to the Arabs. It is a date of heightened tensions. That date this year happens to coincide with May 15th, the Nakba. So if you have Ben-Gvir pounding on the doors, Netanyahu moving aside, a head of the Shabak who cannot be relied upon, and the simultaneous occurrence of Jerusalem Day, which is incendiary, and Nakba Day, there's reason to be concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Danny. Two big issues. I'll open the floor for questions in just 1 minute, but I have one clarification to request. On the dates of the launch of tenders for E1 and the date for opening, my impression before you spoke was that it was 1 June for the launch and 6 July for the opening, but I think you said May and July. Back to you.
Look, the tenders, first of all, double check. I know that the end date is July 3rd. The tenders have been announced, they've been publicized, but the tender book, which contains all of the technical information. These are the lots, these are the building capacities, these are the requisites, has yet to be published. And it was announced that it will be published, if I'm not mistaken, on May 3rd. I think in saying that you may be right, but that date is less significant than the final date. The earlier a statement comes out saying, look, you're jeopardizing your ability to do business with us, the easier or the greater potential the step will have. Because you don't want this statement to be made when the contractors, the attorneys, the planners already have invested time and effort in a tender. The earlier they're scared off, the better. I can tell you bluntly, my wife works for a bank, and she has been telling me for years that the banks are scared stiff about something like this. And for good reason.
Thank you. If I can just welcome from Spain, Igor Zaleka, and from Denmark, I think, Margareta. Welcome. Nice to see you. One more question from me, and then I do open it. More of a remark. Just to back up what Danny has been saying about consultation. In my time back in 2012-13 in Jerusalem, the E3, Germany, France, UK, agreed formally that E1 was a red line. Did not specify what to do, but described it as a red line for each of their governments. I'm aware now of consultations at the level of the national security advisors between the members of the E3. I don't know where it will take us, but I note that Chancellor Merz of Germany, I think it was on the 10th of March, partly after some encouragement from Danny, spoke publicly next to the Czech Prime Minister about E1, saying it is among the annexationist moves of Israel and that Germany condemns it. So we have, of the three E3, normally the most conservative, the most cautious, speaking out on E1. And I'm aware of certainly knowledge and consultation at the level of the National Security Advisor of the UK. What it might take is action in behind the scenes initially from Ireland, from Spain, who are frankly the two most vocal and outspoken advocates of action on settlements in the European Union, to connect with Britain, France, Germany, and make this thing bigger and also better. I'll stop there. But can I open the floor to comment and questions? Annalisa?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Daniel. That was incredibly helpful for me, certainly, to understand the detail of what's taking place. Maybe a very silly question, but you suggested that you would come back to the issue of the gradient involved and how that affects E1 and the kind of distance relative to sea level. I just wondered if you could expand on that, because I don't think you did come back to that unless I missed that in your remarks. But a big thanks for really helpful comments.
Okay, the rapid drop in altitude makes north-south travel become much more difficult and almost impossible as you descend. I added that because it's part of the brief for people aware of the geography. You did remind me of something else. E1 will consolidate Israeli construction between East Jerusalem and the Jordan River. It's not the only thing that is taking place. There is the E1 salient, which is the area around E1 and Ma'ale Adumim. Look at it as a bubble in the occupied West Bank. to the east of Jerusalem. There's a road being built now. Much of it has been completed. There's a median that goes down the road. On one side of the road is Israeli traffic. On the other side of the road is Palestinian traffic. The road is now being completed. And once it is completed, you will have in the area of E1 a dual road system, one for Israelis and one for Palestinians. That means that Palestinians will be able to go from the northern West Bank to the southern West Bank only on a sealed road, like the Autobahn to Berlin before the wall came down. I want to put this in starkest terms. Once the road is completed, and it's 4.9 kilometers that are left to complete it, E1 and the occupied West Bank to the east of Jerusalem will be accessible to the occupier and will not be accessible to the occupied. I use the term apartheid sparingly because it often, as a polemic, sheds more heat than light. In this case, looking at a dual road system such as I'm describing, that term is inescapable. This is apartheid Israel. Now, the activists in Jerusalem, Israeli, Palestinian International, call it the apartheid road. The army calls it the fabric of life road. This shucks, we're going to do this for the benefit of the Palestinians. Bennett said the quiet part out loud. It's the sovereignty road. Now, in addition to that, you have the settler violence, which has also been taking place in the E1 area, but there's also official plans to displace all of the Palestinians living in the vicinity of E1. The most prominent, notorious, is the Khan al-Ahmar, which is currently frozen by the Supreme Court. But there are pressures, number one, to consolidate Israeli control by massive construction, fully integrating this area into pre-67 Israel by major infrastructures and highways, neutralizing the Palestinian presence by making it inaccessible and driving out the local Palestinian population. If that is not de facto annexation, I don't know what is. Just 2 hours ago, I learned something very disturbing, that the government has submitted a plan for the construction of 900 units for Palestinians in the occupied territory. Never been done before. We're right next to Azariah. Now, why is that troubling news? Because it's clear what the intention is. That's where they intend to transfer the residents of Khan al-Ahmar, to cleanse the area of Ma'ale Duming and E1 of its Palestinians, and to transfer them to a Bantustan in another part of the West Bank.
Thank you very much, Danny. Can we turn to Sinead?
Thanks very much, Vincent, and thank you so much, Danny, for a really informative presentation. It's very helpful. We have had difficulty with the Occupied Territories Bill passing through the Irish Dáil here, our Parliament, and the government continue to hold the position that they prefer European-wide action. So I'm more than happy to draft something that we can share with ministers here to specifically put into action the request that you're detailing today, that as a state we will not engage with any contractors who participate in the tendering process. I think what will help that is any extra detail we can garner on the high level consideration that you've talked about, and yourself, Vincent, as well. So I think perhaps if we can share that with everyone here, like I say, their kind of pushback is always around that. What's the point in us doing it alone? I mean, we do our best to counter that narrative, but that's what they kind of try and push. So I think that would be helpful if we can just get that information, so that whatever we can send in is going to be as strong as possible. And then I have an unrelated question. So if it's too tangential, please don't we can maybe engage offline. But I'm curious about your thoughts on the blocking statute that the European Commission have been urged to put in place for the sanctions against the ICC and Francesca Albanese. And I'm just wondering if you consider that to be in any way effective. I just wondered if that might be something you have thoughts on, Danny. Perhaps not. So if not, don't worry. But I just thought I'd throw it in there. Thank you again.
I'm Israeli and I'm a patriot. I love my country. But I look at not only the actions of what we're doing, but how we are trying to generate support. We are trying to bully the rest of the world into supporting us and taking punitive measures against anybody who is critical of Israel. And of course, there has been the conflation of criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. It's a problem. It needs to be dealt with. But there's a clear distinction between criticism, even harsh criticism of Israel, and it has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. I look at this from another angle, which relates to the beginning of your statement. We have seen numerous individuals sanctioned by the United States. It's part of the bullying. You have professors being fired, all sorts of things. I don't have to go through all of the examples. Apparently, being sanctioned by the United States has an enormous impact. You can't get a credit card. You can't can't open a bank account. No, I'm not sure the impact of Luxembourg doing this will have the same effect. But it is clear that sanctioning is something that is being used very effectively by individual countries, not coalition, to great effect. And I think that we should be able to take a page from that. We are proposing this course of action because it does not require EU consensus. We have a great deal of sympathy within the EU. And there are all sorts of new developments, but it will be a while before Hungary weighs in. And German foreign policy is moving very slowly, but it is beginning to move. I will be going to Berlin specifically to discuss this issue. I know. I was informed by friends in Berlin, Danny, what have you been up to? They're talking about E1 all the time, which is an indication that this is in play.
Thank you very much, Danny. I think that your point, Sinead, is a valid one. As no longer in the EU, we're not as close to it as you are here in London. But it's a valid point about what the Commission can and cannot do to protect voices who defend equal rights. Kit, over to you.
Thanks, Vincent. Yeah, and it's certainly the case that the UK government has sought refuge in the "we can't do this stuff alone." We've all stood in the chamber asking questions about, restrictions on settlement goods and other sanctions, and the Prime Minister or the Foreign Secretary always retreats into this. Well, we need to work together with other countries, all the rest of it, and of course that effectively means you get little or no action at all because the coordination itself is well, there's just no impetus behind it. My question to Danny, though, was: is it completely hopeless to think that there might be any voices of sanity internally in Israel, or any break now on the advance of this kind of? I think you once said to us or to me that we had to realize that the Israeli government had itself been settled, and that therefore, and the institutions that surround it, that would normally be a break on it, the Supreme Court, all the rest of it, was falling into line. I mean, as I say, we're struggling to get any kind of significant action in the UK beyond condemnation. But in the absence of any sort of, I guess, voice within Israel that can plug into or sympathize or say, yes, this is the right thing to do beyond individuals like you, it's harder still. Is there nothing?
To be blunt, nothing will change with Netanyahu as prime minister. hopefully, he will be gone in several months. If there will be fair elections in Israel, I think that that is a likelihood, but that's a very big if. Because it is now spoken openly about the possibility of Netanyahu and his cohorts undermining the elections, disrupting them, and questioning its legitimacy. Now, I often hear, it doesn't matter, you Israelis are all the same. The problem is not Netanyahu, the problem is Israel. And to be honest, even though I would word it differently, there's something to that. But there are major distinctions as well. Now, where do I think the problem will be? Assume that there will be a government run by the center right with the coalition of the center parties and the left-wing parties. They will be engageable. They will be attentive to voices such as yours. I had experience with that, with the Bennett-Lapid government. I didn't, it was possible to elicit restraint by quiet engagement, and I was involved in that. But occupation after, so many years is no longer a policy, it's an identity. Occupation is not what Israel does. Occupation is what Israel is. The ideology of the settlers have been spliced into the organizational DNA of the government of Israel and the municipality, which means left to their own devices, plans that are in the pipeline will continue. Now, there are aberrations. I believe one of the first things that the next government will do is a crackdown on settler violence and the surge and seizure of Palestinian lands and its displacement of Palestinians. That's something that I believe is not only achievable, it is likely. Does that mean that settlements will stop expanding, or new settlements that are working way through the legal system? No, it doesn't. What it means, I anticipate here that the things that I'm combating here in Jerusalem will continue, because the bureaucracy does not need marching orders in order to continue these policies. It will require an action to stop them by a new and vulnerable government. But that possibility, new elections in Israel will be a seizable moment. It cures nothing automatically, and we have to be prepared to seize that moment. So I would not totally despair. Let me put it this way: if the contracts for E1 are signed in August and the elections are in October, the chances of stopping E1 are minimal, because a new government, vulnerable, is going to have to violate these agreements, something that last time happened was under Rabin in 1994. Virtually impossible. If, however, the tenders have not been awarded by October, there are ways of making plans disappear without leaving fingerprints.
Thank you, Danny. Can I ask Debbie next, and then Richard Burden? But Debbie?
Some of the other things that have been said is that doing this action will be worn as a badge of honor by those in the Israeli government at the moment. Do you think that's a real risk? And if so, do we need to be more nuanced in terms of the actions that we take? Will they entrench further if we take this sort of action, or should we just shrug it off?
If I understand correctly, the fear is that engagement will force Israel to hunker down and bastion Israel and becoming even more unengageable. I don't think we can be less engageable than we already are. Beyond that, I've been saying for many years, you're not doing us a favor. by giving us a pass and making us unaccountable. On the contrary, I liken the situation, you are the wealthy uncle who is subsidizing my heroin addiction instead of taking the same money and sending me off to rehab where we belong. I look at, just in general, this is beyond my expertise. Where is Israel not engaging in violent military action, as if we can do so with impunity? No, there will be no forward movement on Israel-Palestine as long as Netanyahu is in power. But there will also be no forward movement until an element of accountability is injected into this. What we're proposing here is actually not a full-blown accountability. We're cautioning you. We're warning you in advance. Don't go there. We're not punishing you. We're warning you. Because, and why? E1, Israel's relations with Europe and the UK are based on shared interests and shared fundamental values. E1 undermines both of those. Since you are being so dismissive and contemptuous of the values that we purport to share, there will be consequences, because that's how the world works.
Thank you, Danny. Just before I bring in Richard and then Philippa, and we've got about 10 minutes to go, I'd like to add one more element to the equation, not necessarily for you to comment, Danny, but since Sinead mentioned the Overseas Territories Bill, one of the things that our charity is pushing for in its own way is a total settlement trade ban, goods and services. And that's a bit controversial, the services bit, but it would affect financial institutions and insurance and investment, so it's important. So that's what we're pushing for, and that's what we're trying to write to the media about and trying to persuade our government to consider. So one of the action points to come out of this, and Reese has asked about action points from today, apart from the E1 warning by Spain, by Ireland, by others, Denmark, inshallah, we combined with the E3, the idea of a complete, total ban on settlement trade is, I think, a necessary step, a necessary action by governments that want to turn Israel off heroin. Richard.
Thanks very much, Vincent, and thanks for the briefing, Danny, which is really, really valuable. I absolutely understand and share the concern you've expressed about the application for 900 housing units for Palestinians to facilitate the destruction of Khan al-Ahmar. Could you tell us any more about what's going on around dispossessions of Palestinians associated with the E1 project? Thanks.
Okay. First of all, I will briefly address what's happening in Jerusalem. Israel moved 230,000 settlers to East Jerusalem since 1967. We have done so without displacing Palestinians the last time in any significant numbers. There have been targeted families. Israel has adopted a resolution in 1968 not to build inside existing Palestinian neighborhoods, and we pretty much abided by that. Over the last year and a half, the needle has moved significantly, and Israel has been engaged in large-scale displacement of Palestinians in key areas coveted by the biblically motivated settlers, the Messianic settlers, Silwan, Batar al-Hawa, al-Bustan, and large-scale demolitions that we did not do in the past. And there are now 6 government-sponsored plans for construction inside existing Palestinian neighborhoods, one of which will entail the demolition of an entire Palestinian neighborhood of her own. It's an indication that Israel is going places that we dare not go in the past. I described Israeli policy in the area around of E1 is to delineate the area by security measures, to consolidate control by filling that area with settlements, integrating that area seamlessly into pre-67 Israel. You can go from downtown Tel Aviv to Ma'ale Adumim without a traffic light. Can't do that to my home in Jerusalem. And finally, the neutralization of the Palestinian presence. The neutralization of the Palestinian presence is done in a number of ways. One of which is to surround the villages in area C, near Ma'ale Adumim, with a wall, and to have an umbilical cord that will lead them to the sealed road, which means they're physically inside area C, but they can't go anywhere except out of that area. Now, the villages are being surrounded in this manner. Bedouin encampments can't be surrounded in such a way. Their encampments, they're scattered. And as a result, forced displacement is the rule. There is an attempt to rid Area C of Palestinians. Now, there's been a lot of talk about Israel going as far as de jure annexation, and comparing it to the annexation that took place in Israel in June of regarding Jerusalem in June of 1967. I think there's going to be a major difference. The Palestinians in East Jerusalem aren't citizens of Israel, but they do have entitlements. I don't say they have rights, they have entitlements, and they can go anywhere in Israel. They can buy an apartment in Haifa, whatever, and that is not challenged. I can guarantee you that if Israel does annexation of the West Bank, not one Palestinian will be entitled to move around in Israel. They will be condemned to stay in what's left of the West Bank. So as a result of that, I think that there's this systematic effort to neutralize the Palestinian presence in one of two ways: encirclement or displacement.
Thanks, Danny. Two more speakers, I think, Philippa and then Igor.
Thanks, Vincent, and thank you, Danny, for the maps you sent and for a fascinating presentation, which hopefully gets us all doing what we can. I was a surgeon to trade before becoming an MP, and have lived and worked in both Gaza and southern Lebanon. You mentioned how critical it is to get rid of Netanyahu in the autumn. We are seeing some more Israelis coming out on the street, particularly complaining about the Iran war. But is there any real recognition within Israeli society about the utter damage to your own society of the experiences, the lawlessness of IDF, some of the things they have carried out in Gaza and Lebanon, which they will carry back with them into society? We've heard evidence from former IDF soldiers about struggling mentally. We know this from previous conflicts. And I just wonder how much recognition is there in Israel about how what's going on under Netanyahu's government is actually destroying your own country and society?
Well, it was a few weeks into the war when I began to realize that what we're doing goes beyond any reasonable interpretation of a proportional response. But I found it difficult to talk about war crimes. I found it difficult to talk about genocide, partially because of the filters. The press is not there, and the Israeli press is largely tilted in the way of the government and does not bring us to confront that. But the major obstacle was believing that this is what has become of us. We had trouble believing that this is what became of us. And I think that that's the major obstacle. You are seeing increasing numbers of testimonies of soldiers, and you're seeing, I think, a more forthcoming, perhaps courageous role being played by some parts of the press. The press is not allowed into Gaza. The only voices are, the international press, Gazan reporting on Gaza, which easily dismissed. I think that when the Gaza opens up, we will discover, we'll face to face, it will become a major shock. And that will not necessarily, make people, be enlightened by it. There is a growing recognition of what we've done. By no means is it a majority, but you're also hearing it from people like Olmert. I am not a fan of Olmert, even though I thought he could have been a good prime minister, who's basically saying, we have committed war crimes. He's not marginal. You're hearing it increasingly from the former Israeli military people. Now, a good deal of this is coming out with the ex-Shin Bet, Mossad, and IDF officials saying we're engaged in ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. That is the kind of step that will be necessary vis-a-vis Gaza and Lebanon as well. I think the collapse of support of Israel is still ahead of us and will become more pronounced when the full scope of what we have inflicted on Gaza becomes more evident.
Will it happen in time for the elections, do you think?
No. You'll hear increasing voices. Look, we're in an ironic situation. Israeli democracy is fragile. I think that today we all understand throughout the world, looking at the United States, all democracies are fragile. The future of Israeli democracy depends on our partnership with the Palestinian citizens of Israel. The Israeli Arabs, the Palestinian citizens of Israel, they are the ones who will save Israeli democracy. And a majority of the so-called center-right, no, they don't want it. No, you want a democracy to survive, get real. You need them. And I hope we need them. And you're hearing more voices along those lines as well. Yeah. But, I certainly, this is all hammer and chisel. We're in for a very long slog. There are no Gordian nuts to be cut.
Thank you again, Danny. Igor has desisted, which is very generous of you at 2 minutes past 10 UK time. If nobody else wants to speak, I'll just briefly sum up. We need to encourage governments to talk to each other about warning on E1. We need to do it now because we need to get our statement, our action in before certainly July, but ideally before the tenders are actually launched. I added that part, which is from the Britain Palestine Project, of a total ban on settlement trade, including services, as an ask of our governments, which would bring Spain, Ireland, UK, if it did it, together in action. And you raised the very important point, Danny, about the status quo, where I'm not sure what the action is that we can take, other than to deplore, the Ben-Gvir, it's our home remarks.
Talk to the Saudis.
Talk to the Saudis. Okay, that's a very nice.
They can't be ignored.
No, can't be ignored. Jordanians and Saudis, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. If nobody else wants to speak anymore, and if I've done injustice, Danny, we'll stop there. We'll do because we've recorded this. We'll share it with some friends over in America who are asleep now, and we will make it available to anybody who wants to show it to anybody else. And it's been good. And Danny, you're a voice of reason and courage, which is what Kit Malthouse put in the chat before he left. And good luck in Germany. Take good care.
Thank you.
Bye
Thank
now.
you.
Bye now.
Your solidarity is enormously important for us.
Thank you. You have it. Take care. Bye now.